So when I first got into candle making, I used to think that the top, middle, and bottom notes had something to do with the order in which they were put into the fragrance. So the whole fragrance as a whole, I thought it had something to do with the layers. I looked at it kind of as layers, like that the bottom layer, the middle layer, and the top layer, but that's not at all the case. Maybe you've kind of thought about the same way that I used to, but now that it's been quite a few years, I have learned exactly what the top, middle, and bottom notes mean and how it is perceived for that fragrance, whether it's a candle or any other kind of fragranced home good like perfume or room sprays. And then also how you're able to figure out how to blend things together to create your own unique fragrances. So let's first talk about what the top, middle, and bottom notes actually mean when you're looking at the composition of the fragrance oil. So the top notes are what you're going to smell first. So it's what's going to hit your senses the quickest, but it's also what's going to evaporate the quickest. So it's not going to last as long when the candle is burning. Once it's been a couple of hours and those top notes have kind of evaporated and kind of faded out, the middle notes really take over, and that's really what's considered the heart of the fragrance. So those middle notes will take over and it will last a lot longer than those top notes. But what lasts the longest is those bottom notes. So the bottom notes is what's going to linger the most, and it's also going to ground everything and kind of really round out the scent as a whole. It's also important to note that whatever you read on a fragrance oil of the notes that are in there, notes do not equate to what's actually in the fragrance. Again, it's all about the perception because we're talking about synthetic fragrances, and that is the perception that we are smelling when we are smelling that fragrance. So as an example, I'm going to pull up Midwest Fragrance Company here, and I'm going to pull up their Honey Spice Pear scent because this is one of my favorite fragrances. And let's take a look at what they list as their top, middle, and bottom notes. Also, just so you know, bottom notes are also called base notes. So top notes they have listed as sugar pears, crisp apple, and lemon zest. Middle notes is Earl Grey tea, acacia honey, and warm nutmeg. And the base notes are cinnamon sticks, vanilla, and glazed syrup. So obviously there's no actual honey in there. There's no Earl Grey tea. There's no glazed syrup. There's none of that actually in the fragrance oil composition. It's all about how those aromatic compounds of what's been created will end up smelling as the final product. And when it's been tested and you're actually smelling the scent, what hits you first? Is it that lemon zest? Is it that, really kind of crisp brightness of the pears? You can think about the top notes as being kind of the brightness of the scent. It's what's going to hit your senses. Eucalyptus is also something that is a top note. Mint, something that when you smell it, you kind of go, oh yeah, that's really kind of taking over my senses. It really helps with the cold throw of the candles too. And I think that a lot of times essential oils are used to really help with those top notes, to really kind of, bring out the brightness of the scent. So grapefruit, all these different things that's really going to help the brightness of it. And then those middle notes, a lot of florals live there. Sometimes even fruits, herbs like rosemary, thyme, jasmine, lemon. I have other examples here that are clove, ginger, clary sage. Eucalyptus is also listed on here. I would think of that as being more of a top note, but again, this is really interesting because it is about perception. So some people will list fruits on the top, some will do the middle. Some people will have eucalyptus on the top, some in the middle. Sometimes patchouli will be listed as a middle note, sometimes a bottom note. So it's all about the perception, and that's what's really interesting about fragrance oil is that whenever you are buying a fragrance oil from a supplier, don't think that you have to include every single description of the top, middle, and base notes of that fragrance. Again, if you are perceiving that fragrance in a different way, you can change some things up. So I've changed some things up about the way that I will describe a fragrance. because I feel like I can smell something slightly different, which is really interesting to me because it gives you a little bit more of that creative freedom when you are making a listing for your products. You can also think about it as you have a lot of branding freedom when it comes to the actual description of your fragrances. And this is where brands can really shine because they're able to have such luxurious sounding descriptions for their fragrances, whereas when they purchase it from the supplier, it doesn't sound as luxurious. So for instance, Mixi does this a lot. So the way that they are describing their fragrances, even if their fragrances are something that possibly are the same, quality of fragrances that you can get from a lot of other suppliers, the way that they describe their fragrances will demand a higher price point because of the way that they're describing it. So you can utilize that too with your branding as well. It just gives you more freedom to describe it in such a unique and different way while keeping to what it does smell like, because you do want to keep that, but you can change it up in different ways that will connect more with you and your brand. Now, when it comes to blending your own fragrances together, so in the USA, we do not have any limitations on this. I can grab 10 bottles of fragrances from 10 different companies and blend 10% of each and make it into a candle. So there is no limitation in what we're able to do here in the US. I know that in other places in the world, you have different regulations on that. So please take note that I'm in the US, so this is what I know is allowed here. But when it comes to blending things together, specifically if you're trying to create something more from a very base or like foundational part. So for instance, if we look at Candle Science's elements, they offer scents that are just kind of like a one note fragrance. And you're able to have a lot of freedom there because even though there probably most likely are different types of compounds that they could have added. So for instance, in a vanilla, there's a lot of times that there is tonka bean added alongside vanilla because it just helps to boost that kind of sweet vanilla scent out of that. And that's just something you'll see a lot. You'll see vetiver and sandalwood and cedar. All of those notes work really well together. And those notes where it's all kind of under the same fragrance category on the fragrance wheel, those are what's known as kindred scents. So kindred fragrances that are going to work really well together, but there's also complementary fragrances as well. And these are what's going to sit opposite of the wheel. So if we're looking at like on Candle Science, they give the example of amber and then like a marine kind of beachy scent. Those ones can work really well together and just bring out these really interesting, intricate kind of scent. So for instance, looking at this wheel, you could play around with blending together the amber, the kind of marine ozonic scent, and then you could also add in a citrus scent on top. So maybe a bright orange or a lemon peel or something just to brighten it up. Because a lot of times if you have just a lot of the bottom notes, it can feel just a little flat where you want to add in a little bit of that brightness to it. So if you look and you see a lot of fragrances that are more heavy on the side of they're a little bit more masculine, they're a little bit more depth, they're vanilla, they're, sandalwood, those kind of scents. If you look at the pre-blends that you can get from companies, a lot of times those do include some brightness on top, even if it's just a small portion of the scent, because it's just there to help really round the scent out as a whole. And it helps just bring it to life, essentially, is what you're doing. Instead of just having it be just one kind of bottom base note, it really helps to brighten it up. So the best way that I have found to blend scents together is just to imagine just looking at a bunch of different scents and just imagining what they would smell like together and just taking the perfume sticks and doing a 50-50 blend at first and just kind of dipping each stick in and just kind of letting it, dry a little bit just so it's able to get a little bit more of an indication of what it would smell like. And then just kind of wafting it in front of your nose just to see what those two would smell like together. And then if it's something that you're really interested in, I always start with a 50-50 blend whenever I am trying something out. If you're wanting to blend more fragrances together, you could do the 33%, you could do 4 and do 25% each, or if you're adding even more, of course, it gets a little bit more complex there. You have to think about it in terms of percentage. So remember, whenever you're doing your fragrance oil equation, whenever you're doing your formula for your fragrances, it's always going to be in percentages so that you can translate that to any batch. So you're able to then break up your batch of, if you're making a 280 gram candle, you can then take those percentages of the fragrance oil of that portion that you need. So let's say you need 25 grams of fragrance oil, you can take that number and figure out the math from that point in order to create your fragrance that you need for that candle. But what I would recommend is if you are just getting started, just blend 2 fragrances together. You can do pre-blends, you can do something like the Candle Science elements to where it's more of those single note fragrances that I really like to be able to add together. And then one last thing I wanted to mention, because I know I mentioned, having all of these, the top, middle, and bottom notes. I actually think that's a really fun thing to play around with, is to add 3 together. Do a top note, a middle note, and a bottom note. And it's very interesting because you can see this come together as an actual fragrance. Even if you're just using 3 separate notes, like if you're doing the Candle Science elements, you're really able to see how the fragrance oil rounds out and comes together. So instead of just doing like a top and a bottom note, once you add that middle note in there, it just rounds everything out and it just creates just like an actual fragrance instead of just scents that are just trying to blend together. But I'm curious to know, did you used to think about top, middle, and bottom notes kind of like what I did, where I thought that's what was actually in it and that it had something to do with like the layering of how they added it in? Did this video help you? Did you get some ideas? I want to know down in the comment section below. But with that, I am going to end today's video right here, and I will see you in the next one.